Sarah Chen had always been different from other girls in her small Texas town. While her classmates spent their afternoons at the mall or gossiping about boys, Sarah was in her garage, practicing martial arts moves she learned from YouTube videos and old kung fu movies her grandfather had collected. Her grandfather, Chen Wei, had immigrated from China decades ago, bringing with him the ancient knowledge of Wing Chun Kung Fu. He had taught Sarah the basics when she was just 7 years old, telling her stories of how martial arts wasn't about fighting, but about discipline, respect, and protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. By the time Sarah turned 16, she had grown into a lean, athletic teenager with quick reflexes and an even quicker mind. She stood barely 5 feet 4 inches tall and weighed only 115 pounds, making her seem fragile and delicate to anyone who didn't know her true capabilities. The local community center had recently started a self-defense class for teenagers, and Sarah's mother encouraged her to join. "It would be good for you to make some friends," her mother had said, not knowing that Sarah already possessed skills far beyond what any community center instructor could teach. On her first day at the class, Sarah walked into the gymnasium wearing simple black workout clothes and her hair tied back in a neat ponytail. The instructor, a former police officer named Mike Rodriguez, was demonstrating basic blocking techniques to a group of about 20 teenagers. As Sarah quietly took her place at the back of the group, she immediately noticed the whispers and sideways glances from the other students. Most of them were larger than her, and several were boys who clearly thought they were tough because they played football or wrestled at the high school. "All right, everyone pair up for some light sparring practice," Officer Rodriguez announced. "Remember, this is just about learning basic defensive moves. No one's trying to hurt anyone here." Sarah found herself paired with Jessica, a girl from her chemistry class who was captain of the volleyball team. Jessica was nearly 6 inches taller than Sarah and had the muscular build of someone who spent hours in the gym every day. "Don't worry. I'll go easy on you," Jessica said with a smirk, loud enough for others to hear. "You look like a strong wind could knock you over." The comment drew snickers from nearby pairs, and Sarah felt the familiar sting of being underestimated. She had experienced this her whole life. People looking at her small frame and assuming she was weak or helpless. During their practice session, Jessica threw slow, clumsy punches that Sarah easily avoided by simply stepping to the side. When it was Sarah's turn to practice offensive moves, she held back significantly, throwing gentle taps rather than real strikes. "Come on, Sarah," Jessica taunted. "My little sister hits harder than that. Are you sure you're in the right class? Maybe there's a yoga group down the hall that would be better for you." More laughter erupted from the surrounding students, and Sarah felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment. She glanced toward Officer Rodriguez, hoping he might intervene, but he was busy helping another pair and hadn't heard the comments. The harassment continued throughout the entire 90-minute class. When they practiced throwing techniques, Jessica made exaggerated grunting sounds every time Sarah attempted a move, as if Sarah was too weak to even perform the basic motions correctly. "I bet she's never been in a real fight in her life," whispered Tom, the starting linebacker for the high school football team. "She probably runs away crying whenever someone raises their voice at her." By the end of the class, Sarah felt humiliated and angry. She had wanted to fit in and make friends, but instead she had become the target of cruel jokes and mockery. As she gathered her water bottle and towel, she overheard Jessica talking to a group of girls near the exit. "Did you see how pathetic she was?" Jessica was saying. "I honestly felt bad for her. She was trying so hard, but she couldn't even do the basic moves right. I don't know why someone like that would even bother coming to a self-defense class." Sarah's hands clenched into fists at her sides. Every instinct her grandfather had taught her screamed that she should walk away, that proving herself wasn't worth the potential consequences, but the laughter and whispers followed her all the way to the parking lot, and she knew this was only the beginning. The next week, Sarah returned to class despite her mother's suggestion that she might be happier in a different activity. She told herself that she needed to give it another chance, that maybe the other students would warm up to her once they got to know her better. She was wrong. If anything, the mockery had gotten worse. Jessica had apparently spent the week telling others about Sarah's pathetic performance, and now even students who hadn't been in class the previous week were joining in the jokes. "Hey, it's Kung Fu Sarah," called out Brad, one of Tom's teammates. Are you going to show us some of those deadly moves you learned from watching cartoons? The comment sent the group into fits of laughter, and Sarah felt her face flush red with anger and embarrassment. She tried to focus on Officer Rodriguez's instructions, but the constant whispers and giggling made it impossible to concentrate. During partner exercises, Jessica deliberately made Sarah look foolish by exaggerating her reactions to Sarah's gentle techniques, flopping around dramatically as if Sarah had actually hurt her. Ow, ow, ow. Jessica cried out in mock pain after Sarah performed a simple wrist control technique. Please don't hurt me, Master Sarah. I'm not worthy of your ancient kung fu wisdom. The entire class burst into laughter, and this time even Officer Rodriguez chuckled, though he tried to hide it behind his hand. Sarah realized that she was completely alone in this situation. Even the instructor saw her as nothing more than a harmless joke. That night, Sarah sat in her garage, practicing forms her grandfather had taught her years earlier. Each movement was precise and powerful, her body flowing through the ancient techniques with a grace and skill that would have shocked anyone who had seen her earlier that day. She thought about her grandfather's words. True strength comes not from the muscles, but from the spirit. A warrior who must prove their strength to others has already lost the most important battle. But as she continued her practice, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that there were some battles worth fighting, some lines that shouldn't be crossed. The question was whether she was strong enough to handle the consequences of showing her true abilities. 3 weeks into the class, the mockery had reached a point where Sarah dreaded walking into the gymnasium. The other students had given her the nickname Paper Tiger, and they used it openly, even in front of Officer Rodriguez, who seemed to think it was all harmless fun. Sarah's confidence was beginning to crack under the constant pressure. She found herself questioning whether she really was as skilled as her grandfather had always told her, or if she had been deluding herself all these years. The breaking point came during a particularly difficult class, when Officer Rodriguez announced that they would be practicing more advanced techniques, including some ground fighting basics. This is where things get a little more serious, he explained to the group. In real self-defense situations, you might end up on the ground, and you need to know how to protect yourself and get back up safely. Sarah was paired with Jessica again, and as they began the exercise, she could see the cruel gleam in the taller girl's eyes. This should be fun, Jessica whispered as they got into position. Try not to cry when you hit the mat, Paper Tiger. What happened next would change everything. Though Sarah didn't know it yet, as she lowered herself into the starting position for the ground exercise, she caught sight of a familiar face in the observation area of the gymnasium. Her grandfather, Chen Wei, was standing quietly near the back wall, his weathered hands clasped behind his back, watching the class with the patient, observant expression Sarah knew so well. Their eyes met for just a moment, and he gave her the slightest nod. Not of encouragement to fight, but of reminder of who she truly was beneath all the doubt and humiliation. Sarah took a deep breath and centered herself, feeling the familiar calm that came with years of training and meditation. Whatever was about to happen, she knew that her real test was just beginning. The ground fighting exercise began with Jessica taking the dominant position, straddling Sarah's waist while Sarah lay on her back. According to Officer Rodriguez's instructions, Sarah was supposed to practice basic escape techniques while Jessica maintained control. But Jessica had other plans. Instead of following the controlled movements they had been taught, Jessica began applying real pressure, pressing down hard on Sarah's shoulders and making it genuinely difficult for her to breathe properly. What's wrong, Paper Tiger? Jessica hissed, quiet enough that Officer Rodriguez couldn't hear from across the room. Having trouble with a little pressure? Maybe you should have stayed home with your stuffed animals. Sarah tried to perform the escape technique she had been shown, but Jessica was using her size and weight advantage to make it nearly impossible. The other students gathered around to watch, and Sarah could hear their whispered comments and barely suppressed laughter. She's completely helpless, someone said. This is actually kind of sad to watch, another voice added. Sarah felt panic beginning to creep in, not because she couldn't escape. She knew at least a dozen ways to reverse the position instantly, but because she was trapped between her grandfather's teachings about restraint and her growing desperation to make the humiliation stop. Jessica seemed to sense Sarah's distress and pressed her advantage further, leaning down to whisper directly in Sarah's ear. "You know what? I don't think you belong here at all. Maybe after today, you'll finally get the message and stop wasting everyone's time with your pathetic attempts at being tough." That was when Sarah noticed that Officer Rodriguez had stepped outside to take a phone call, leaving the class unsupervised. The circle of students around them had grown larger, and their comments were becoming bolder and more cruel. "Just give up, Sarah," Tom called out. "We all know you can't actually fight." "Yeah. Stop pretending to be something you're not," added another voice. Sarah closed her eyes and tried to center herself the way her grandfather had taught her. But Jessica chose that moment to increase the pressure even more, making it genuinely hard to breathe. "Are you seriously about to cry right now?" Jessica said with disbelief and disgust. "Oh my God. Guys, I think she's actually crying." Sarah wasn't crying, but she was reaching the end of her patience. Every fiber of her being was screaming at her to end this humiliation, to show these bullies exactly what she was capable of. But her grandfather's voice echoed in her mind. "The greatest victory is the one that requires no battle." Unfortunately, Jessica interpreted Sarah's stillness as complete submission and decided to make the situation even worse. "You know what, everyone? I don't think Paper Tiger here has learned her lesson yet," Jessica announced to the group. "Maybe we need to show her what real self-defense looks like." Without warning, Jessica shifted her weight and attempted to put Sarah into a chokehold, something that definitely wasn't part of any technique they had been taught. It was at this moment that Sarah realized the situation had crossed the line from bullying to potentially dangerous. Sarah's training took over instantly. In one fluid motion, she placed her hands on Jessica's hips, bridged her back, and rolled to the side, using Jessica's own momentum to reverse their positions completely. The movement was so fast and smooth that Jessica found herself on her back before she even realized what had happened. But Sarah wasn't done. Years of suppressed frustration and weeks of humiliation fueled her next move. She flowed seamlessly into a mount position and then immediately transitioned into an armbar, controlling Jessica's arm with precision and applying just enough pressure to make it clear who was really in control. The entire sequence had taken less than 3 seconds. The gymnasium fell completely silent. Every student was staring in shock at the complete reversal of the situation they had just witnessed. Jessica's eyes were wide with surprise and the beginning of real fear. She was completely immobilized, and she could feel the tremendous power in Sarah's grip despite her small size. "Let me go," Jessica whispered, all of her earlier arrogance completely gone. Sarah looked down at her tormentor, feeling a mixture of satisfaction and concern. She had the power to seriously injure Jessica with just a slight increase in pressure. But she also knew that crossing that line would change her forever. Instead of applying more pressure, Sarah leaned down and spoke quietly enough that only Jessica could hear. "I've been holding back this entire time, because my grandfather taught me that real strength doesn't come from hurting people who are weaker than you. But if you ever try to actually hurt me or anyone else again, you'll find out what I'm really capable of." Sarah released the hold and smoothly returned to her feet, offering Jessica a hand up. Jessica ignored the offered help and scrambled backward, clutching her arm and staring at Sarah with a completely new understanding of who she was dealing with. The silence in the gymnasium was deafening. Every student was looking at Sarah with expressions ranging from shock to fear to grudging respect. "How did you do that?" Brad asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "That was like something out of a movie." Before Sarah could answer, Officer Rodriguez returned from his phone call, immediately sensing that something had happened in his absence. "Is everything okay in here?" he asked, looking around at the unusually quiet group of teenagers. "Everything's fine," Sarah said simply, though her heart was still racing from what had just occurred. Jessica nodded quickly, not wanting to admit that she had been completely dominated by the girl she had been mocking for weeks. Officer Rodriguez looked suspicious but decided not to press the issue since no one appeared to be injured. "All right then, let's move on to the next exercise," he said, but everything had changed. For the rest of the class, no one made a single joke about Sarah. The other students gave her a wide berth, and she could see them whispering among themselves, clearly trying to figure out where she had learned to fight like that. When class ended, Sarah gathered her things quickly, wanting to avoid any confrontations or questions. As she headed toward the exit, she was surprised to find her grandfather waiting for her in the hallway. "Grandfather, what are you doing here?" she asked in Mandarin, the language they always spoke together at home. "I came to watch you practice," he replied, also in Mandarin. "Your mother told me you were having some difficulties with the other students." Sarah felt embarrassed that he had witnessed the confrontation. "I tried to follow your teachings about avoiding conflict, but she was actually trying to hurt me. I had to do something." Chen Wei nodded thoughtfully. "You showed restraint and wisdom. You used only the force necessary to protect yourself, and you offered mercy when you had the power to cause harm. This is the true way of martial arts." They walked together toward the parking lot, and Sarah felt a mixture of relief and anxiety about what might happen next. She had revealed her abilities, and she knew there was no going back to being invisible. "Grandfather, what if they tell everyone what happened? What if people start expecting me to fight all the time now?" "Then you will face that challenge with the same wisdom you showed today," he replied. "True warriors are not those who seek out battles, but those who have the strength to end them quickly and mercifully when they have no other choice." As they reached the car, Sarah looked back at the community center, wondering if she would continue with the class, or if this incident had effectively ended her attempt to fit in with her peers. Her grandfather seemed to read her thoughts. "Your real education is just beginning," he said. "Tonight, I will start teaching you the advanced techniques that your great-grandfather taught me. You have shown that you are ready for the true responsibility that comes with real power." Sarah nodded, understanding that her life was about to change in ways she couldn't yet imagine. The secret she had kept for so long was out, and there was no telling what consequences would follow. But as she sat in the passenger seat, watching the community center disappear in the rearview mirror, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in weeks: pride in who she was and what she was capable of. The real test, however, was yet to come. Word of what had happened in class would spread quickly through the small town's gossip network, and Sarah had no idea that her demonstration of skill had been witnessed by some very unexpected observers who would soon change her life in ways she never could have anticipated. 3 days after the incident at the community center, Sarah's life took an unexpected turn. She was eating lunch alone in the school cafeteria, as she had done for weeks since word of her confrontation with Jessica had spread throughout the school. The reaction to the story had been mixed. Some students avoided her entirely, apparently afraid of what she might do to them. Others looked at her with new respect but seemed unsure how to approach her. Jessica herself had been notably absent from school, claiming to be sick, though everyone suspected she was simply too embarrassed to face the aftermath of being so thoroughly dominated. Sarah was picking at her sandwich and trying to focus on her history textbook when she noticed 4 men in military dress uniforms enter the cafeteria. They spoke briefly with the principal, Mrs. Henderson, who then pointed in Sarah's direction. The men approached her table with the confident, measured stride of experienced soldiers. Sarah looked up from her book to find herself facing 2 Marines, 1 Army soldier, and 1 Navy sailor, all wearing their formal dress blues and multiple service ribbons. The Marine sergeant, a tall man with graying temples and kind but serious eyes, spoke first. "Excuse me, are you Sarah Chen?" he asked politely. "Yes, sir," Sarah replied, automatically showing the respect her grandfather had taught her to give to all adults, especially those in uniform. "My name is Sergeant Major Williams," the Marine said. "These are my colleagues: Staff Sergeant Rodriguez from the Marines, Sergeant First Class Johnson from the Army, and Petty Officer Davis from the Navy. We were wondering if we could have a word with you." Sarah glanced around the cafeteria, noticing that their conversation was already drawing curious stares from other students. The presence of 4 military personnel in full-dress uniform was not something that happened every day at Jefferson High School. "Am I in trouble?" Sarah asked, genuinely confused about why the military would want to speak with her. Sergeant Major Williams smiled. "Not at all. Actually, we're here because of some very impressive skills you demonstrated recently. Would you mind if we sat down?" Sarah nodded, and the 4 service members arranged themselves around her table. She noticed that despite their relaxed demeanor, they all maintained perfect posture and kept their hands visible. Habits ingrained by years of military training. "Sarah, we understand that you've been studying martial arts. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez said. "We also understand that you recently had to defend yourself in a situation at the community center." Sarah felt her cheeks redden. "How did you hear about that?" "Small towns talk," Petty Officer Davis said with a gentle smile. "But more importantly, one of our colleagues was in the area that day and happened to witness what occurred. He was quite impressed with your technique and your restraint." Sergeant First Class Johnson leaned forward slightly. "Sarah, what we saw described was not the work of someone who learned a few moves from YouTube videos. The level of skill you demonstrated suggests years of serious training. Would you mind telling us about your background?" "You demonstrate." Sarah hesitated, unsure how much she should reveal. Her grandfather had always taught her to be humble about her abilities, but these men clearly already knew more than they were letting on. "My grandfather taught me Wing Chun Kung Fu," she said simply. "I've been training with him since I was 7. The 4 military personnel exchanged glances, and Sergeant Major Williams nodded thoughtfully. "Sarah, we're here because each of our branches runs special training programs for close-quarters combat and personal protection. We're always looking for individuals with exceptional natural talent and the right mindset for advanced training." "What kind of training?" Sarah asked, though she was beginning to have an idea where this conversation was headed. "The kind that could lead to some very interesting career opportunities," Staff Sergeant Rodriguez said. "But first, we'd like to see if what we heard about your skills is accurate." Sarah looked confused. "What do you mean?" Sergeant First Class Johnson smiled. "We mean we'd like to see if you're as good as people say you are. Would you be interested in a friendly sparring session? Just to demonstrate your techniques?" 18. Sarah's eyes widened. "You want me to spar with you? All of you?" "Not all at once," Petty Officer Davis laughed. "Though that would certainly be interesting. We were thinking more along the lines of individual demonstrations, just to see how you handle yourself against opponents with different styles and experience levels." Sarah thought about her grandfather's teachings about avoiding unnecessary conflicts, but she also remembered his words about facing challenges with wisdom and courage. "When and where?" she asked. "How about after school today?" Sergeant Major Williams suggested. "We've already spoken with your principal and your parents. Your grandfather actually gave his permission and said he'd like to observe." Sarah felt a surge of nervousness and excitement. These were real military combat instructors, men who had trained for years in the most advanced fighting techniques in the world. Even with all her confidence in her abilities, she wondered if she was really ready for this kind of test. "What happens if I do well?" she asked. "Then we talk about some opportunities that might interest you," Staff Sergeant Rodriguez said. "There are programs for exceptional individuals, scholarship opportunities, specialized training that could set you up for a very unique career path. And if I don't do well?" Sergeant Major Williams smiled. "Then you'll have learned something valuable. And we'll all have had an interesting afternoon. But based on what we've heard, I don't think that's going to be a problem." The rest of the school day passed in a blur. Word had spread quickly about the military personnel visiting Sarah. And by the time classes ended, there was a considerable crowd gathered in the school parking lot to see what would happen next. The demonstration was set to take place in the school gymnasium, with Principal Henderson's permission. Sarah changed into her workout clothes and tried to calm her nerves as she prepared to face her first real test against trained military combat experts. Her grandfather arrived just as she finished warming up, and she could see the pride and concern in his eyes as he took a seat in the bleachers along with the growing crowd of curious students and teachers. "Remember," he said to her in Mandarin, "this is not about winning or losing. This is about showing who you truly are." Sarah nodded and walked onto the gymnasium floor, where the 4 military instructors were waiting. They had changed into workout clothes as well, and she could see the serious, professional focus that had replaced their earlier casual demeanor. "We'll start simple," Sergeant Major Williams explained to the crowd. "This is a demonstration of technique and control, not a competition. Safety is the top priority." He stepped forward first, assuming a standard boxing stance. Sarah bowed respectfully and then settled into the Wing Chun ready position her grandfather had drilled into her thousands of times. The gymnasium fell completely silent as the 2 fighters began to circle each other. Sergeant Major Williams started with a simple jab, testing Sarah's reactions. She slipped the punch easily and responded with a quick trap and strike combination that stopped just inches from his face. The Marine's eyebrows rose in surprise. The speed and precision of her movement had been remarkable, and he realized immediately that the reports about her skills had not been exaggerated. He tried a more complex combination, mixing punches and kicks. Sarah flowed around his attacks like water, using her opponent's energy against him, and finding openings for counters that she pulled just before contact. After 2 minutes of sparring, Sergeant Major Williams stepped back and nodded with obvious respect. "Impressive," he said simply, and turned to his colleagues. "Who wants to go next?" Staff Sergeant Rodriguez stepped forward, and Sarah could see that he was taking this more seriously than his colleague had. His stance was lower and more balanced, and his movements had the fluid economy of someone trained in multiple fighting systems. This sparring session was more intense. Rodriguez pressed the attack with grappling techniques, trying to take the fight to the ground where his size and strength advantages would matter more. But Sarah had been expecting this. As Rodriguez shot in for a takedown, she sprawled perfectly, and then used his momentum to flow into a standing arm control that left him completely off balance. The crowd gasped as the much smaller girl controlled the much larger Marine, with what appeared to be effortless technique. Rodriguez tried several more takedown attempts, each one countered smoothly by Sarah's superior positioning and timing. Finally, he stepped back with a shake of his head and a broad grin. "Outstanding," he said. "Absolutely outstanding." Sergeant First Class Johnson was next, and Sarah could see that he was bringing a different energy to the match. His movements were more aggressive, designed to test how she would react under pressure. But pressure was something Sarah had been training to handle her entire life. The harder Johnson pressed, the calmer she became, flowing through his attacks with the meditative focus her grandfather had taught her. When Johnson tried a particular combination that left him slightly overextended, Sarah saw her opening and took it. She stepped inside his guard and demonstrated a throw that sent him gently to the mat, maintaining control throughout so he wouldn't be injured. The gymnasium erupted in amazed whispers and scattered applause. Finally, Petty Officer Davis stepped forward. He had been watching the previous matches carefully, and Sarah could see that he was adjusting his strategy based on what he had observed. His approach was more technical and patient, looking for small openings rather than trying to overwhelm her with aggression. For several minutes, they engaged in a technical chess match, each testing the other's defenses and reactions. But eventually, Sarah's superior speed and precision began to tell. She found an opening and demonstrated a lock that controlled Davis completely while applying no harmful pressure. As the 4 military instructors stood together, looking at the small teenager who had just outclassed all of them, the gymnasium was completely silent, except for the sound of heavy breathing. Sergeant Major Williams was the first to speak. "Sarah Chen," he said formally, "on behalf of the United States military, I'd like to extend an invitation for you to learn about some very special opportunities that might be available to someone with your unique talents." The crowd erupted in cheers and applause, but Sarah barely heard them. She was looking at her grandfather, who was smiling with quiet pride, and she realized that this moment was the beginning of a journey she had never imagined possible. The girl who had been mocked as Paper Tiger just 3 days earlier had just demonstrated skills that impressed seasoned military combat instructors. As she walked off the gymnasium floor, Sarah knew that her life was about to change in ways that would take her far beyond the small Texas town where it had all begun. The real question now was not what she was capable of, but what she would choose to do with the incredible opportunities that were about to open before her.